silent weapons for quiet wars. Those who get hooked on the economic drug must go to the elite for a fix. In this, the method of introducing large amounts of stabilizing capacitance is by borrowing on the future credit of the world. This is a fourth law of motion, onset, and consists of performing an action and leaving the system before the reflected reaction returns to the point of action, a delayed reaction. The means of surviving the reaction is by changing the system before the reaction can return. By this means, politicians become more popular in their own time, and the public pays later. In fact, the measure of such a politician is the delay time. The same thing is achieved by a government by printing money beyond the limit of the gross national product, and economic process called inflation. This puts a large quantity of money into the hands of the public and maintains a balance against their greed, creates a false self-confidence in them, and for a while stays the wolf from the door. They must eventually resort to war to balance the account, because war ultimately is merely the act of destroying the creditor, and the politicians are the publicly hired hitmen that justify the act to keep the responsibility and blood off the public conscience. See section on consent factors and social economic structuring. If the people really cared about their fellow man, they would control their appetites, greed, procreation, etc., so that they would not have to operate on a credit or welfare social system which steals from the worker to satisfy the bum. Since most of the general public will not exercise restraint, there are only two alternatives to reduce the economic inductance of the system. 1. Let the populace bludgeon each other to death in war, which will only result in a total destruction of the living earth. 2. Take control of the world by the use of economic silent weapons in a form of quiet warfare, and reduce the economic inductance of the world to a safe level by a process of benevolent slavery and genocide. The later option has been taken as the obviously better option. At this point, it should be crystal clear to the reader why absolute security about the silent weapons is necessary. The general public refuses to improve its own mentality and its faith in its fellow man. It has become a herd of proliferating barbarians and, so to speak, a blight upon the face of the earth. They do not care enough about economic science to learn why they have not been able to avoid war despite religious morality, and their religious or self-gratifying refusal to deal with earthly problems renders the solution of the earthly problems unreachable to them. It is left to those few who are truly willing to think and survive as the fittest to survive to solve the problems for themselves as the few who really care. Otherwise, exposure of the silent weapon would destroy our only hope of preserving the seed of the future true humanity. The economic model. Economics, as a social energy science, has as a first objective the description of the complex way in which any given unit of resources is used to satisfy some economic want. Leontief matrix. This first objective, when it is extended to get the most product from the least or limited resources, comprises that objective of general military and industrial logistics known as operations research. See Simplich's method of linear programming. The Harvard Economic Research Project was an extension of World War II operations research. Its purpose was to discover the science of controlling an economy. At first, the American economy, and then the world economy. It was felt that with sufficient mathematical foundation and data, it would be nearly as easy to predict and control the trend of an economy as to predict and control the trajectory of a projectile. Such has proven to be the case. Moreover, the economy has been transformed into a guided missile on target. The immediate aim of the Harvard Project was to discover the economic structure, what forces change that structure, how the behavior of the structure can be predicted, and how it can be manipulated. What was needed was a well-organized knowledge of the mathematical structures and interrelationships of investment, production, distribution, and consumption. To make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer know-how developed for the electronic field could be directly applied in the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connecting to an active indicator is mathematically analogous to the initiation of war. The greatest hurdle which theoretical economists faced was the accurate description of the household as an industry. This is a challenge because consumer purchases are a matter of choice, which in turn is influenced by income, price, and other economic factors. This hurdle was cleared in an indirect and statistically appropriate way by an application of shock testing to determine the current characteristics, called current technical coefficients, of a household industry. Finally, because problems in theoretical electronics can be translated very easily into problems of theoretical electronics, and the solution translated back again. It follows that only a book of language translations and concept definitions needed to be written for economics. The remainder could be gotten from standard works on mathematics and electronics. This makes the publication of books on advanced economics unnecessary and greatly simplifies project security.
Industrial diagrams. An ideal industry is defined as a device which receives value from other industries in several forms and converts them into one specific product for sales and distribution to other industries. It has several inputs and one output. What the public normally thinks of as one industry is really an industrial complex, where several industries under one roof produce one or more products. A pure, single output industry can be represented over simply by a circuit block.
A node is a symbol of collection and distribution of flow. Node number 3 receives from industry number 3 and distributes to industry number 1 and number 3. If industry number 3 manufactures chairs, then a flow from industry number 3 back to industry number 3 simply indicates that industry number 3 is using part of its own output product. For example, as office furniture. 3 industrial classes. Industries fall into 3 categories or classes by type of output. Class number 1, capital, so resources. Class number 2, goods, the commodities or use, dissipative. Class number 3, services, action of population. Class number 1, industries exist at 3 levels. Number 1, nature, sources of energy and raw materials. Number 2, government, printing of currency equals to the gross national product, GNP, and extension of currency in excess of GNP. Number 3, banking, loaning of money for interest, and extension, inflation, counterfeiting of economic value through the deposit loan accounts. Class number 2. Industries exist as producers of tangible or consumer dissipated products. This sort of activity is usually recognized and labeled by the public as industry. Class number 3. Industries are those which have service rather than a tangible product as their output. These industries are called number 1, household, and 2, governments. Their output is human activity of a mechanical sort, and their basis is population. Aggregation. The whole economic system can be represented by a 3-industry model if one allows the names of the outputs to be 1, capital, 2, goods, and 3, services. The problem with this representation is that it would not show the influences, say, the textile industry on the ferrous metal industry. This is because both the textile industry and the ferrous metal industry would be considered within a single classification called the goods industry. And by this process of combining or aggregating these 2 industries under one system block, they would lose their economic individuality. The E model. A national economy consists of simultaneous flows of production, distribution, consumption, and investment. If all of these elements, including labor and human functions, are assigned a mathematical value in like units of measure, say $1939, then this flow can be further represented by a current flow in an electronic circuit, and its behavior can be predicted and manipulated with useful precision. The 3 ideal passive energy components of electronics, the capacitor, the resistor, and the inductor, correspond to the 3 ideal passive energy components of economics called the pure industries of capital, goods, and services, respectively. Economic capacitance represents the storage of capital in one form or another. Economic conductance represents the level of conductance of materials for the production of goods. Economic inductance represents the inertia of economic value in motion. This is a population phenomenon known as services. Economic inductance. An electrical inductor, example a coil or wire, has an electric current as its primary phenomenon and a magnetic field as its secondary phenomenon, inertia. Corresponding to this, the economic inductor has a flow of economic value as its primary phenomenon
and a population field as its secondary field phenomenon of inertia. When the flow of economic value, example, money, diminishes, the human population field collapses in order to keep the economic value, money, flowing. Extreme case, war. This public inertia is a result of consumer buying habits, expected standard of living, etc., and is generally a phenomenon of self-preservation. Inductive factors to consider. 1. Population. 2. Magnitude of the economic activities of the government. 3. The method of financing these government activities. See the Peter Paul principle, inflation of the currency. Translation. A few examples will be given. Charge. Columbus dollars, 1939. Flow current. Amperes. Columbus second. Dollars of flow per year. Motivating force. Volts. Dollars. Output. Demand. Conductance. Amperes per volt. Dollars of flow per year per dollar demand. Capacitance. Columbus per volt. Dollars of production. Inventory. Stocks per dollar demand.